Hello, welcome to this episode. And this episode is all about scales and using the scales as a tool to monitor your fat loss progress. So just to clarify, just to start with, scales can be a really good method to monitor progress, but we need to really understand what that number is telling us and how to interpret that number. And I think I've recorded this. This is probably like, number 4, because I can't quite, or I couldn't quite get my point across. And it just really comes down to the fact that I think it's user error. I think the way that some of us use the scales is not the best way in terms of monitoring their progress, and they're not quite interpreting the data correctly. So hopefully, when you've listened or watched this podcast, you're going to hopefully understand a bit more the better ways to use this tool, and also some errors that you've perhaps been making, that we've all been making over time. I mean, just quickly, it was not so long ago that I myself as a PT and chatting to people, and people would come to me wanting to lose weight, get into shape, and I would say, weigh yourself in, but only weigh yourself in once a week, once a fortnight. Don't be doing it all the time. Give yourself a chance to lose the weight. And that is so wrong now, but I presume there's still people out there that are doing that. The caveat to this is, to really get the best out of this tool and to be able to really find out if what you're doing, that whether it's diet, whether it's movement, whatever it is, to find out whether that routine is working for you, the good thing, the pros of the scales. I mean, let's talk about, what's the pros and cons of scales. Scales, the pros are, it's so quick, easy, and convenient to just hop on and just get that weight. And actually, you can just get that result so quickly. And in that, like I say, in that first week, 2-3 weeks of starting a diet or implementing whatever it is to try and lose weight, the scales are good because they will give you that feedback quickly. So then, if it looks like you're not making progress, you can then tweak and make changes. We're going to talk about 2 other methods of tracking your progress as well a bit later on, but they take a little bit more time. So like I say, the pros of the scales are you can jump on them anytime. They're quick, easy, convenient to do. The cons, the negative of the scales is, and this is where I was going wrong when I was trying to record this, it's not the scales' fault. The scales get a bit of a bad rap. The likes of Joe Wicks call them sad steps and whatever. Now, if you've got a strong emotional attachment to the scales, if the scales or the number on that scales is gonna negatively impact you for the rest of the day or put you in a mood that you can't seem to shake, then take what I'm going to say now with a pinch of salt. Because for me, the best way to use the scales, at least initially, is to be weighing in on quite a regular basis. You've got to, in my opinion, work out, because weight will fluctuate. Okay, weight fluctuates on a daily basis, and you need, for me, to be aware of your pattern, your weighted pattern throughout, say, a month. But like I say, if you're somebody that is triggered by the scales, that actually they'll end up sort of depressing you if the number stays the same or goes up, that's going to ruin your day or week, then you might want to come away. So this is not for you. And what you might want to do is maybe carry on listening, but go more down the route of the other 2 methods that I'll talk about in a bit. But in terms of weighing in, you might want to come away from the scales a little bit. But if you've not got any sort of emotional attachment to that number, to the scales, and you can look at it for what it is, which is just literally a data point, a statistic that tells you just what you weigh at that given time on that given day. If you can take the emotion out of it, then what I would advise is to get weighing yourself, at least initially, for, I would say, what would be brilliant would be 28 days. On a 28-day cycle, and see what your weight does. Because like I say, weight loss and fat loss are two very different things. So another thing, if you don't know the difference between weight loss and fat loss, I'd also advise you to maybe pause me now. What I've done an episode explaining the difference, and like I said, there's a massive difference between weight loss and fat loss. I've done an episode on that. I've put the link to it in the comments below. So I would advise you to pause me and go and watch that one first. By doing that, you're going to get much more out of this episode. So, what I would advise, so let's just clarify again. The people that are jumping on the scales are normally people that want to monitor weight loss, okay? But when we say weight loss, we're really talking about losing body fat. And the problem is, another con or a negative of the scales, that the scales are they're limited. All they're going to tell you is what you weigh on that given time, on that given day. That's all the data they're going to give. I know that some of you are going to be shouting, oh, but I've got scales that tell me what my body fat percentage is and my, how much water I'm holding. Those scales, again, I would just take, that's just an extra bit of information, but they're not the most accurate things. So take those readings with a pinch of salt. It's a bit like activity trackers. My Fitbit, and there is other fitness trackers on the market, but my Fitbit tells me that I burn 4,000 calories a day. Now, if I ate 4,000 calories a day, my body weight would not stay the same. I'd be gaining something like, 5-6 pounds a week of fat if I ate 4,000, because I know for a fact that I'm more around 3,000. So I've got to take a pinch of salt, what the stats that certain things give you. The other thing with those scales is there's a definite link between your levels of water and how they affect the fat reading. So if you were to weigh yourself over 2 days, and in between those two weigh-ins, you went and sweated out, a litre or two of water, although you're only 24 hours apart, you would then trick those scales into thinking that your body fat level is different. It would change by a good few percent, just on the basis that you're actually more dehydrated in one than the other. So take it with a pinch of salt, but over a long period of time, if your body fat percentage is coming down on those type of scales, the chances are you are losing. And like I say, linked with the two other methods that I'm going to explain in a bit, that's a good way of monitoring your progress. So scale-wise, going back to this, what you need to do, in my opinion, is find a pattern. So it would be ideal for you to weigh yourself initially on a daily basis. You'll probably find, when I do this, I find that my heaviest on the scales is normally a Monday, because I'm a little bit less restrictive at the weekends, a bit more relaxed with my eating. So I come in on the Monday morning a little bit heavier. I then do all my training, all my movement, and I'm a bit more strict with my diet in the week. So from Monday then all the way to sort of Thursday, Friday, the number starts coming down. Okay, so I know that quick turnaround, it can't be body fat. I can't be putting on 2 or 3 pounds of body fat over the weekend. And I can't be losing 2 or 3 pounds of body fat during the week. That quick turnaround just doesn't happen. And that's because of food weight, and it's because of water as well. But also with ladies, you have got that 28-day cycle in terms of your menstrual cycle, and fluid is a big factor in the fluctuation of weight that you'll see. And the interesting thing is that if you weigh yourself just over a 7-day period, you'll see that your weight is just slightly different every single day. So just have in your mind and just be aware of what goes into that number. Like I say, it's how we interpret it. It's user error. I think we we read too much into that number, that weight, and we don't understand what it really does comprise of. And that one that I said as well, the example of weighing yourself in on the Monday morning, we just suddenly think, although we're only weighing, although that number tells us our weight, we automatically think, oh my word, I've got fat over the weekend. I've put on 3 pounds of fat. How the heck has that happened? And it's not. Like I say, go and listen, if you've not already, go and listen to my difference between my weight loss versus fat loss episode. So yeah, we want to get a better handle on what's happening with those scales. So it's not just going to be a one-off to start. It's not going to be a one-off measurement. We're going to measure that over a period of time to see how that plays out, what pattern we're going to get through that. So like I say, you might find that at the beginning of the week, you're a little bit heavier, and at the end of the week, you're lighter. What I would then do is then try to compare like for like. So what I did, I then settled into sort of a 2 or 3 day weigh-in. So I would weigh myself in on a Monday and I'd weigh myself sort of Thursday or Friday or both. And then I would compare my Monday to the previous Monday. What you want to do is just be consistent. Take all the variables out of it. Take as many variables out of it as you can so you can accurately compare one reading to the other. So I would compare my heaviest day of the week to my heaviest day of the week the previous week and my lightest to my lightest. And although it's still going to fluctuate, as long as the scale number is coming down on a monthly basis, and you can see it starting to come down, you know you're making progress. Yeah? So weight loss on the scales will fluctuate, but fat loss is uniform. Over time, you should, over a 4 or 6 weeks period, your average weight should come down. If it's not coming down, then you're not in a deficit and you're not making progress. And that's where you need to tweak accordingly. Okay? The other thing about weighing in is you've just got to be as consistent as you can. You've got to take all those factors, all those variables out, so you know exactly, you can get it down to, because we all have those moments where we think, oh, we've had a really good week. Oh my goodness me, I've gained 2 pounds, but I've been so good. And then it's a case of being a detective and working out, right, so what has affected that? It can't be body fat. I mean, let's quickly go, body fat. A pound of fat is 3,500 calories. I'm also going to do an episode on this, because if this is really, it all comes down to maths. There's no way you can overconsume by 10,000 calories in a day or two. There just isn't. So you've then just got to work out, right, why are the scales telling me this? How do I interpret this measurement? Yeah, take the emotion out of it and just look at it as a number, but right, what is the difference between that? But on the whole, there's going to be the odd measurement that you don't expect, and that's fine. But just to say, if over a period of time, on average, your weight is staying the same or slightly going up, then you know that you're not in a deficit. Whatever you're doing, you're not quite tweaking it in the right way, and you need to now just rethink about your calories in, calories out. But to have fluctuation over a month, but to finish lighter than you started, that shows that you are losing body fat. So like I say, be consistent. Make sure you set your scales up in the same place every time. So a lot of people have them in the bathroom, some people might have them in the kitchen, but make sure the surface is a nice flat surface and it's in the same place every time. Okay? Secondly, make sure you're wearing the same thing. I'll just weigh myself in the morning, I'll just be wearing boxers or whatever, but make sure you're wearing the same thing. It might be a gym thing. You might, trust the scales at the gym, for instance. Make sure you always weigh yourself with your shoes on every time, or if you take your shoes off, make sure you're always taking your shoes off to measure. So wear the same thing when you're measuring yourself. So that takes that discrepancy out of it. The other thing is, and this is the toilet thing, okay, this is the big thing. make sure you're going to get a more accurate reading if you've been to the toilet. And when I say that, I mean when you've been for a number 2. Yeah? So what you can't do, and I've had this in the past, I've had people not really, I don't know how they've not got it, but I had a conversation with somebody a while back where she couldn't understand. She was trying to lose weight. She was thinking she was in a deficit. She was training hard. She was moving. But she'd weigh at the start of the week, and then as the week progressed, she would gain weight. And then she'd lose a bit of weight, and then she'd gain weight. And we were chatting a few times in class. This was over a few weeks, and it was only after our third or fourth conversation that I sort of said, what are your bowel movements like? What is your toilet habit like? Are you regular? Do you go to the toilet every day? Now, look, this is something we need to talk about. I'm regular, okay? So when I measure myself, another client I've got, we call it favourable. So if your weighing is favourable, that means you've been to the toilet. You've had a poop, yeah? Unfavourable is you've not been to the toilet. So again, if you're weighing yourself, if day 1 you're favourable, and then day 2 you weigh yourself again, but you've not been to the toilet, you're unfavourable, you can't, they're not the same thing, because you're carrying food weight now. So you've got to understand that as well. So what was happening, going back to my class member, was that, yeah, she was not a daily pooper, shall we say. So what was happening is, say she'd poop on day 1, but then she wouldn't go then for, say, 2 or 3 days. So it seems obvious, but you're then carrying more food weight. You're carrying more poop in your system day on day, so it's not going to show your fat loss. So you can be losing fat, but actually your weight will be saying that you're heavier. And then what she would do on day 3 or 4, she'd go to the toilet. She'd then be less than she was on day 1. So a more accurate time is, make sure in the morning, before you've eaten anything, before you've drank anything, jump on the toilet, do your business, then weigh yourself in. But understand, if your next weigh-in is unfavourable, understand that I've had people stay the same but be unfavourable. And to me, that means they've lost sort of a good pound or so. So just understand that. So you want to try and weigh yourself in after the toilet. And like I say, do it over a period of time. Again, if it's that time of the month for the ladies, you do tend to hold a lot more fluid. So understand that. So if it's that time of the month and you weigh yourself in and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I've gained, how have I gained weight? I've been so good this week. Understand that your body's going to be holding on to a bit more fluid at certain times in your menstrual cycle. And being aware of that just allows you, because again, you want to stay motivated, you want to keep moving forward, and mentally you don't want to be feeling bad, thinking you're putting all the effort in, not seeing any reward. Because the thing is with the scales, you can actually gain weight on the scales, but still be losing body fat, if that is made up of food weight and made up of water. But also, you can lose weight on the scales and not drop any body fat. And I know that sounds confusing. Let me say that again. You can gain weight on the scales, but be losing body fat. But you can lose weight on the scales and not be dropping body fat. An example for this is, think about, combat sport. Think about boxing. They weigh themselves in, don't they? There's weight categories in boxing, and if they come to weighing in, if any of the fighters is slightly overweight, what do? They go straight off to a sauna, or they jump onto a treadmill with one of these sweatsuits on, and they sweat the weight off. So if they're 2 pounds over on the scales, they go and they will sweat out that 2 pounds. So although when they re-weigh, the scales say they're 2 pounds lighter, but they've not lost 2 pounds of fat. So this is where we need to see the limitations of the scales. But when we've got more data points, when we've got more data to look at, and the pattern is showing a downward trend, that shows that you are losing body fat. if that then makes sense. So if you use the scales correctly, I still think they are a great method and a great tool to monitor progress when it comes to fat loss and losing body fat and getting into shape. The other two then, the other two methods, which combined with the scales, I think it just gives you a much rounded picture. So the other two methods are measurements and pictures. Like I say, the pros of these give you a more rounded and a more accurate picture of what's happening in terms of your inch loss, in terms of fat loss, okay? But what I would say is these are sort of, you know, medium and more long-term sort of ways of monitoring. So for your measurements, I wouldn't measure yourself much more regularly than once a month. I would perhaps leave the measurements, measure yourself every 8 to 12 weeks. And same with pictures. I would perhaps take your pictures every couple of months. But like you can see, if you've got issues with scales and you're saying, right, it's not doing my mental health any good, I'm not going to weigh myself. All I'm going to do, I'm going to just check my measurements and pictures. The con or the negative of this is it takes a little bit more time to see those differences, which means if you're not quite doing the right things, you're not going to find out for a little bit later. And that's what I think is one of the really good positives of the scales, is if you know how to read the scales, which hopefully you now do, you can pretty much over a week or two see if the differences you're making, the changes you are making the differences you want. But combine them with these two methods, and I think you get a full picture and you get a more rounded idea of the progress you're making. And it's great to see. I mean, we all see these transformation pictures. But again, the caveat for these two is be consistent and re-measure and re-photograph yourself in exactly the same positions, exactly the same ways. So with measurements, I would measure around shoulders, I would measure around your chest. Stomach-wise, I'd perhaps use your belly button as a marker, because then you can't really go wrong. It's more accurate when you re-measure yourself while using your belly button. I would then just maybe measure the thinnest part of your waist. That'd be a good one. And then your hips. I would look at feet together, and I'd find the bony parts of your hips, and again use that as a marker for a measurement. Maybe the biggest part of your thigh, or you could measure, say, up from your knee, but again, just make sure you're consistent in where you're measuring every time, and maybe a calf measurement. So be consistent with the way you're doing that, and that's a great way. So, and that's another thing, and then when you've got all this data, even if, for instance, I'll come back to that. Let's just go on to pictures. I'll try and remember to come back to that. The picture is a tool, so whether you use a camera or your phone to photograph yourself, again, make sure you're in the same position for every photo. So I would pick a background that's just a nice plain background. Make sure you're stood the same distance away from the wall. Make sure your camera is the same distance away from you and the angle of that camera is the same. Make sure your pose is the same, so make sure as you stand there to the front that your feet are the same distance apart, arms just by your sides. I'd try and smile. The amount of testimonials and transformation pictures you see, and they look just way too serious. Try and have a little smile. But yeah, that position, have a picture to the front, have a picture to the side, and a picture from the back. But again, stand in exactly the same thing and be wearing exactly the same thing each time. So you can really see the difference. The differences that you're seeing are fat loss and inch loss. Okay? And now you have those three ways, those three methods, three tools to monitor your progress. The example I was going to say earlier, so for instance, you could start getting pretty down that you're thinking, right, the scales aren't really budging. I'm not seeing much progress here. I'm getting a bit down and I'm ready to throw the towel in. Now, the good thing about the 3 methods is scales. So method 1 is not budging. But method 2, you measure yourself and suddenly you think, oh my goodness, I'm still losing inches. You take your photograph, you have a little look and you think, oh my, yes, those 2 pictures look different, and you can tell that I seem to be a bit smaller to him, to lost inches. So what's happened there is, from all those 3 bits of data, is that you've lost body fat, but you've perhaps put on muscle. And this you can, if you're new to exercise, new to training, that can be done. And let's just bust one myth. I mean, this makes me laugh all the time when people say that a pound of fat a pound of muscle is heavier than a pound of fat. Let me say that again. A pound of muscle is heavier than a pound of fat. I mean, it's just bonkers, isn't it? A pound of muscle weighs a pound of fat weighs a pound. So that's not the case. What people get confused with on this is a pound of muscle takes up less space. A pound of fat takes up more space. So if you've seen the pictures on socials or whatever, and I'll perhaps Google this, you can see it. So if you were to lose a pound of fat and gain a pound of muscle, your inches would come down because, like I say, the pound that you've put on in muscle is smaller than the big amount of fat that you've lost. So, but you wouldn't know. If you were just relying solely on the scales, you would have perhaps threw the towel in at that point. But because you've then gone to method 2 and 3 and you've measured yourself and everything, it gives you a bigger picture and it shows actually I'm moving in the right direction, because it shouldn't matter too much depending, you know, what your weight is. It shouldn't matter too much about the weight. It's all about dropping that body fat. Eventually it will catch up because it does take a while to build muscle. So eventually what would happen is muscle building would slow down, but if you can keep burning the fat, keep losing the fat at the same rate, then the scales would eventually start to budge, and if you stay into that deficit. So, like I say, let's have a quick recap. Let's wrap it up and recap, okay? Number 1, weigh yourself in daily to start with and find out your pattern. See what your fluctuating weight pattern looks like over 28 days. From that, you can then decide what day or 2 or 3 days a week you're then going to weigh yourself in, and you can better compare like for like. On top of that, be consistent with how you weigh yourself in. Make sure you're wearing the same clothes, make sure you're weighing in the same position, and make sure it's post-poo, people, post-poo. Then method 2, do your measurements. Make sure your measurements, though, are the same and consistent with the areas that you've measured the time before, but every sort of 2 to 3 months, take your measurements. And then thirdly, with your photos, take your photos again, sort of every 2 to 3 months, but make sure your positioning is the same, make sure you're wearing the same thing. And with all of those 3 tools, you should then have a great idea of if the changes and the routine that you've implemented is giving you the results that you want.